Okay, so if you have a book, if you'll open it up to page XZ. In fact, on Canvas, if you go to Canvas and click on discussions, there's a discussion question, and the discussion question is part of your reading assignment. And the first discussion question has to do with the table of contents that's on page VI to XI. And those who have a book, if you look at those pages up in the front of the book, it's right inside the front cover. 1, 2, from the very front of the book, 3 pages in. Everybody has a book found it? You got it there? The table of contents. The reading instructions basically tell you to read every page in the textbook, and that includes the table of contents. Okay, so someone who has a book, what's the title of the first chapter?
Introduction to Geography.
Introduction to Geography. So they're going to spend some time introducing you to the field of geography. What's the second chapter?
Weather and climate.
Weather and climate. How many of you have ever studied weather or climate in school?
Like middle school.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All of you have. So that means this chapter on weather and climate won't be a completely new chapter for you. You follow that? You've already had a little bit of weather and climate, so it might be some review. What's chapter 3?
Landforms.
How many of you have studied landforms someplace in the past? Whoa, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Where'd you study landforms?
This year.
In elementary school? Is that where most of you studied it?
No. This year.
In physiology? In physical science? No? Okay. So what about, well then that won't be completely new information. What about chapter 4? What's chapter 4 for those of you who have a book?
Biochemical cycles and the biosphere.
Biogeochemical cycles and the biosphere. How many of you have studied the biosphere somewhere? 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, for half of you then, this is going to be brand new information. No. When you look at chapter 4, you'll remember that, oh, I studied some of that before, probably in grade school. Okay? But those of you who say, yeah, I remember studying the biosphere. Do you remember those people went out in Arizona and built this great big plastic bubble? Remember that? They put some plants in there, and some people went inside to live. And you'd have to be vegan, wouldn't you, to live in that little biosphere? But the idea was, we're going to create a place where people can live inside this bubble with everything they need. They grow it themselves, and the plants take in the carbon dioxide that they give off and produce the oxygen that they need to live. So if you live in California where there's lots of smog, say, just buy a big bubble and move inside and live there. You go, yeah, but you can't take your bubble with you. No, because it's a huge thing. It has to be to grow all the stuff you need. But you'll live well when you're inside. You just can't do anything. I mean, you say, could I get me a little motorcycle? You crank up that motorcycle, it's going to mess up the atmosphere inside your bubble big time. So when we study chapter 4, some of that will come back to you. Chapter 5 talks about, what's chapter 5 talk about? Those who have a book.
Population and migration.
Population and migration. So how many of you have studied population and or migration? Bunch of you studied. Same thing in grade school? or maybe some of it in high school. Okay? So what about chapter 6? What's that all about? Cultural geography. How many of you have studied cultural geography? Where'd you guys study cultural geography?
Middle school.
Where?
Middle school.
In middle school? Okay. Wow. Wow, how cool is that? So that won't be brand new stuff to you, will it? So chapter 8, the human food supply. How many of you have studied the human food supply? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rest of you didn't realize that we're at the top of the food chain. You go, what? Yeah. No. You say, I only eat vegetables. Well, then you're at the top of the vegetable food chain. So we'll talk about human food supply. Why do we throw so much food away in this country? Because what would happen if you went to McDonald's and ordered a $1 chicken sandwich or a $1 hamburger and the bun was dried out and the meat was cold?
Ask for another.
You'd say, I don't want this. Give me another one. And they'd say, okay, and they take it back, and what do they do with it?
Oh, yeah.
They don't put it on a shelf and sell it to somebody else. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. They throw it away. And so to keep that from happening, they got a little timer going. And every so many minutes, what hasn't been sold, because people want it right now, they don't want to wait for you to cook it, they throw it away. Why do we throw so much food away in this country? Oh, when I was a child, I remember my mother saying, don't leave food on your plate. There are hungry people in, what country were you told about? Africa? I was told it was China. There are hungry people in China. And I wanted to say to my mother, so box this food up and ship it to them. But I knew if I said something like that, I'd get in big trouble. So I just didn't say anything. But did you know we do ship a lot of our, I guess you'd call it raw material food supply stuff to other parts of the world where people don't have as much to eat? And you would think that would really be well received by all those people overseas. I mean, we produce so much wheat here in America that we can't use it all, and most of the world lives with bread, so we give wheat away. I'm thinking, why don't those countries appreciate us more? Then you find out about what happens to that wheat that we put in sacks and ship overseas. Sometimes the people who unload the ships don't give it to the people in their country. They sell it to other countries and pocket the money. That's disgusting. I'm thinking there's a shortage of food in the world because there's just selfish people who aren't willing to, share the food that's available with the people who need it. Well, chapter 9, we got to quit talking about these. We're going to talk about them one at a time. Chapter 9, what's chapter 9 talk about, those who have a book?
Earth's resources and environmental protection.
Okay, how many have studied Earth's resources? Oh, where'd you study it?
High school.
Junior
Middle
high.
school? What about environmental protection? Haven't we all been inundated with environmental protection? You know what gets me? The guy who wrote a book on how we're ruining the environment, I think his book was an Uncommon Truth or something. His name's Al Gore. I don't mind naming names in here. He wrote a book on how we're spoiling the environment and all of us ought to be more aware of it. Do you know how big a house he lives in? Do you have any idea how much energy he consumes every day just to keep a house warm that's way too big for him to get around in? And you know what kind of car he drives? Now, some people who talk the talk, walk the walk. There are wealthy people who drive little tiny cars. In fact, I think Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world in Omaha, he drives a little car and lives in a little house, and nobody in the world can believe it. Because what do most people do who get as wealthy as he is? They build huge mansions and drive big cars and have more than one of them, and it's just like, hey, what's the point? What's the point? Why don't we do something to protect the environment? And I get the impression that a lot of people who are telling all of us what we ought to be doing to protect the environment need to talk less about it and do more of it and be a role model for us instead of telling us how to live. And granted, I know I don't live far enough away from school where I could ride a bicycle to school. It would probably take me, 45 minutes to an hour to get here. But so what? Wouldn't that be a great workout? So why don't I ride a bicycle to school every day and ride home? Who knows how healthy I'd live? Who knows how healthy I'd be? How long I would live? I mean, you never know. I could be protecting the environment as well as being healthier. Yeah, but I'm not going to do it. Okay, I'll buy a little car that gets 40 miles to the gallon. That's my contribution, but I'm not riding a bicycle and I'm not walking. I'm going to get in that car and turn it on, and I'm going to let it run for a while till it warms up. Besides, it runs on gasoline made from oil that we pump out of the ground. There's plenty of oil in the ground to last till I die. For you people, that's another story. By the time you're as old as I am, it could all be gone. Then you don't have any choice. You have to ride a bicycle. And it wouldn't hurt you. It would change the whole culture. It would probably minimize the number of overweight people, and health insurance would go down because people would be healthier. Okay, but that's where, save this oil, save the oil. I'm thinking, no, in fact, did you know we're producing so much oil today in America that we're exporting it to other countries because we can't use it all? You go, what? So where's it coming from? Oh, it's on my Twitter account. Now, usually when I say I have a Twitter account, students laugh. But I guess since you're enrolled in a class for credit, you're afraid to do that early on like this. My Twitter account is called CBC Geography. No space, just CBC Geography. While I'm reading the news on the computer and I see something that's worthy of geography class, I just go tweet on it and add it to my Twitter account. So you can go read all this marvelous stuff about geography on my Twitter account. Is somebody looking it up?
Yeah.
Good for you. Okay, so the last time somebody looked it up, they started laughing after they looked at it, and I said, what's so funny about my geography tweets? And they go, it's not your tweets, Dr. Bonine, it's the fact that you only have 8 followers. Is that what it still says? I only have 8 followers? Well, how many people are interested in following somebody who only uploads geographic tweets? So, hey, just take some time to look at it and see if you can find some interesting information about one of these topics. And since this class is going to cover the whole waterfront, so to speak, in geography, I'm putting stuff up there from all the different areas. Okay, the next chapter 10 talks about cities and urbanization. How many of you have studied cities? Didn't you study it in social studies when you were in grade school? Cities and towns and villages and all that kind of thing. And urbanization. Okay, we'll have a chapter on that. Chapter 11. What's chapter 11 all about? Those who have a book.
A world of states.
A world of states. What state are we in? You say,
Missouri.
I'm in a cold state right now. I'm freezing to death and I had to get up to come to class and I didn't feel like it. No, I mean, what geographic state are we in? You don't know. What state?
Missouri.
Missouri. Thank you. Kansas is that way. Illinois. Do you know the ones that Arkansas is to the south of us? Iowa's to the north of us? We're in the state of Missouri. And chapter 11 is going to talk about all the states in the world. And for chapter 11, are we going to have to memorize all the states and their capitals? No, you did enough of that in grade school. If you want to know the capital of Missouri, what do you do today? Google it. That's right. You just Google it, and it tells you. So, but we're going to talk about the world of states. Chapter 12, what does chapter 12 talk about?
Paths to economic growth.
Paths to economic growth. How many of you have studied economic growth? 1, 2. Where'd you study it?
I think it was high school.
Where?
I think it was high school.
In high school?
Yeah.
You had a class on economics.
No, but we
Yeah.
touched on this in another class.
But in other classes, you touched on economic growth. For the rest of you, chapter 12 will be a whole new bunch of brand new information that we're going to have a lot of fun with. Chapter 13. What's the title of chapter 13 from someone who has a book?
Global challenges and the scale of response.
Global challenges. So here we are. After we finish all these chapters and you have all this geographic information, we're going to solve the world's problems. We're going to look at all the challenges facing the globe and we're just going to resolve them. Simple enough. And we'll talk about what people are doing about it and trying to do about it and what we can do about it, if we're so inclined. All right, so that takes care of the table of contents. Now, the reason you want to read the preface, though, why would I read the preface? You want to find out what the guy who wrote the book was thinking when he wrote this book. Then it helps you kind of understand what's going on. When you get over here to page XXI, if you know your Roman numerals, that's Roman numeral 21. There's a picture of the guys who wrote this book. Well, I think that is so cool that Carl and William and Edward let us see what they look like. So now you know. Nice looking people. Have any of you started reading your book yet in chapter 1? Nice looking people can write a book that can wear you out. Really? Isn't it true? You start reading this thing, and these guys are using 50-cent words, talking about things that, whoa, what are they talking about here? What's going on? On page 2, they talk about geography, and they talk about, it says, what is geography? And then they talk about physical geography, human geography, cultural geography, cartography. What is that? The study of carts? Map making. Isn't that nice that they put stuff in parentheses when they use a word that you might not be familiar with? He often puts stuff in parentheses. If you come across a word that you don't understand what they're saying, what are you going to do?
Google it.
Thank you. Thank you. Google it. So now, I know, you say, so if I do that, it's going to take me a long time to read this book. Right. That's why reading the book is worth so many points. I want you to take a long time to read the book. And when you come across something that you say, I don't know what they're talking about, Google it. Remote sensing. Remote sensing. Oh, your sweater feels so soft. How do you know that? remote sensing. I'm sensing remotely. No. Wouldn't that be nice if we could do that? Just stand and say, that sweater looks soft. I could remotely sense that. Anyone want to tell the class what remote sensing means on page 2?
Mapping Earth from satellites and aircraft.
Mapping the Earth from satellites and aircraft. And then Geographic Information Systems, GIS, provides tools that help both physical and human geographers store, display, and analyze geographic data. Well, that's kind of the big overview of what the guys who wrote this book say geography is all about. And in this class, we're going to try to cover a little bit of a lot of topics and not just take one of these topics and spend all of our time on it. But these guys who wrote this book thought, wouldn't it be nice to know something about the history of geography? It's on page 2, but they don't call it the history of geography. They call it the development of geography. But it's really kind of a history of geography. Anybody know anything about the history of geography? Well, when you get your books and read page 2, here's what it says. Every language has a word for the study that we call geography. The Greek word that we use is geographia, which means earth description. Geographia. That sounds kind of like geography, doesn't it? If you sound it out. It was the title of a book by a Greek scholar named Eratosthenes. He was the director of the library in Alexandria, Egypt. Are you familiar with the library in Alexandria, Egypt? Ah, somebody back there is. Good. That was a very famous library. The library was the greatest center of learning in the Mediterranean world for hundreds of years. No copies of his book have survived. Wow, why are all of his books gone? What do you think happened to the library?
It was burned.
It got torched. Somebody came in and took over and said, we do not like Greek wisdom in our world, so they just burn all the Greek books. Ah, what a loss. Haven't you seen that happen in some of the current events with what's gone on over in the Middle East with those terrorists going through Syria and doing what? Just destroying all this history because they don't want any of that past knowledge polluting people's minds. No copies of his book have survived, but we know from other authors that accepted the idea, he accepted the idea that the earth was round, and he even calculated its circumference with an amazing degree of precision. You know, have any of you ever heard that people say that people thought the earth was flat for a long time until somebody discovered it was round? Now, maybe some people thought it was flat, but have any of you ever been to the ocean? Have you stood on shore and noticed a ship way out there in the water? If it's a long ways away, how much of the ship could you see? Just the top part of it? So, did you sound the alarm and say that ship is sinking? Because you said that ship is on the other side of the curvature of the water. Agreed? People who used to get in boats and go fishing, they knew the earth was curved. Just because if you live on the seacoast, it's obvious. I think some people like to think that only modern people are smart enough to figure out the earth is round, and nobody else knew it before we did. And I'm thinking there's a whole bunch of people who knew it. They just weren't writing books about it because they were too busy out catching fish and making a living. And so many people live next to the ocean where they would see that phenomena. And now, granted, when Columbus decided that he wanted to sail to the other side of the world, some people said, oh no, you'll fall off the edge. I don't know who those people were, but don't we have some of those same nutcases around here today? I mean, not here on campus, but they're on the media. I mean, have you read about any of them? They really didn't send astronauts to the moon. That's all Hollywood stage stuff. You know what I would like to do with one of those guys? Put him in a capsule and send him out there to live in that space station for a while, to let him know that it didn't take a lot more energy to figure out how to get from here on to the moon. It is not and the earth is not flat. There's people out there still saying, no, the earth is flat. It's like, you know, your brain's flat. That's what's happening. So anyway, geography started with the Greeks, and then after the great age of Greek civilization gave way to the Roman era, the Roman Empire produced a number of geography scholars and compilations of geographic learning. So the Greeks put their stuff in the library in Alexandria. The Romans did. In the same place the Greeks had theirs. But between the fall of the Roman Empire and the European Renaissance, Western civilization accumulated little additional knowledge. And much of the knowledge was actually lost in Western Europe, but preserved by Arab scholars. So what? Yeah, Arabs were also involved in developing geography. See, Muslims traded with people all around the world. So in order to carry on that trade, they had some scholars who produced some very impressive textbooks describing and analyzing the physical environment as well as the customs and the lifestyles of different people. You go, well, do we have some of those scholarly works that Muslims produced? Yes. Well, how come we have those and we don't have some of those Greek and Roman documents? Well, those Muslim scholars, when they moved in and took over, I don't think the scholars did it. They weren't threatened by it. But the soldiers who came in felt a need to burn everything and only bring into our new conquered land our knowledge. And I think probably some of the Muslim scholars were disappointed that they did that, but what happens if you say something about it and complain? Anyone ever live in a Muslim country? What happens if you ladies say, I'm tired of wearing this covering over my head, I'm going to take it off? What are you going to do about it? What are they going to do about it?
Kill you.
You're going to be in serious trouble. Because they take that approach. So that's why, the book doesn't talk about it because it's trying to be sensitive and politically correct in the sense that you don't say bad things about people, but let's face it, when Muslims invaded Europe, they destroyed a lot of the learning from the past. But when Europeans drove the Muslims out, what did they destroy? All the Muslim learning that had been added to the library. So it goes that, as somebody would say, that road goes both ways? It's not a one-way street. China developed an extensive geographic literature. The oldest known work, the Tribute of Yu, dates from the 5th century before Christ and describes the physical geography and natural resources of various provinces of Chinese Empire. Now, I'm glad they put in here the 5th century before Christ. So the Chinese were doing some geography before Christ. They said BC. But do some of you have other books that say BCE instead of before Christ or before the Christian era? Any idea why somebody decided to change it to BCE and what BCE stands for? They didn't they wanted to be religiously neutral, so they wanted to take Christ out of the picture and just make it and call it the common era. But what's funny about that is, when did the common era start? When Christ came to the earth to make a difference in all of our lives, which is quite uncommon, but that doesn't surprise me that scholars would use a descriptive word that doesn't quite fit what it's all about to be a part of this common era. But the Chinese had their geography books. And it even says the Japanese and the Koreans also had geography books. And it says the people of Africa may have had access to geographic accounts of the parts of the world known to them, but these works have not survived, or modern scholars have not yet fully inventoried and studied them. And then, of course, it talks about on page 3, the revival of European geography. Why do they call it a revival? What did they call it over here? That they said this stuff was lost until what happened? What happened in history? The Renaissance. There was a whole new surge in learning in Europe, and it talks about some German geography books that were found and how they became standard works around the world. Say around the world? Yeah, because Varen's book became a standard reference book for over 100 years, and Sir Isaac Newton edited 2 editions of it, and one of them was used as a geography book at Harvard in the 18th century. So history has a rich tradition, and in fact, they mention a couple of people here who were early explorers. The German, this is on page 3 at the bottom of the page, the German explorer and naturalist Alexander von Humboldt. How many of you have heard of Alexander von Humboldt? Nobody. Well, look at page 4. There's a statue to remember him in New York City. Well, what did this guy do? He had a brilliant interrelating of the phenomena of physical nature and the world of humankind, and he had an enormous intellectual impact. In fact, he was probably one of the first to talk about how if we're not careful, we can mess up the world we live in and not make it livable for the next generation that comes after us. If you get all of your heat for cooking and keeping warm in the winter from cutting trees down, and if you cut down all the trees and burn them all up, what are your grandchildren going to do for heat? I don't know. You'll have to figure it out. That's their problem. Don't you know, if you got all of your heat for your house from wood, that if you were going to be a sensible person thinking about the future, every time you cut down a tree to turn it into firewood, what would you do right next to the stump of that tree you just cut down? Do what?
You'd plant another one.
You'd plant another tree. And then, while you're going around your property harvesting trees, you're planting new ones. And by the time you get all the way around your property and get back to where you started, the tree that you planted will be grown so your grandchildren can have firewood if they'll just keep the cycle going. I know a guy in Iowa, who actually bought an acreage with trees on it, and he calculated how many acres he would need to make enough firewood to keep him warm all winter and to do his cooking in the summer. And then every time he harvests some trees, he plants some new ones, and he has his own little system going for producing firewood. And when he's gone, his grandchildren can move in there, and if they do the same thing, they'll keep it going. But for some reason, some people think, just cut the trees down, they'll come back on their own. No, it took years for those trees to get here. And if you are going to use them like that, just to stay toasty warm in the wintertime, then plant some new ones. And if you don't want to plant more trees, then eat cold meat sandwiches and dig a hole in the ground and hibernate when it gets cold. But if you're going to use up those natural resources, at least think of something you can be doing to make life livable for the next generation. And actually, this guy Humboldt and George Perkins Marsh kind of sounded the alarm way back early in America. And is it pretty obvious a lot of people weren't listening? They just weren't paying attention to what these guys had to say. Well, he has a section here on why study geography, and it's like you don't have any choice about it. I'm going to study it so I can get a decent grade in this class. That's why I'm going to study geography. But they talk about all the benefits of studying geography. And then on page 5, they talk about on page 4. Why did I say page 4? I don't know. Oh, page 4 talks about globalization tensions. So I have a question for you to discuss on Canvas. What globalization tensions have you heard about in recent news reports? Thinking of all the topics in geography that we're going to study, what global tensions are you familiar with, or have you heard something about? Are we as a country having any tension with any other countries? What countries? What?
Korea.
North Korea? Now, do we get anything from North Korea? Do we need anything from them to have a comfortable life here in the United States? Probably the only thing we need is for them not to pull the trigger on some missile and blow somebody up. So let's just live and let live. Let's learn to get along and be friends with each other. I don't know who decided to do this, but do you think anyone who's a news reporter did us any good by making fun of the dictator in North Korea? He reads American newspapers. So if you make fun of his haircut and his clothing styles, I wonder if he's going to like you at the end of the day. I mean, sometimes I think modern media ought to take some responsibility for the bad PR we get around the world because of the way they talk about people overseas. Any other countries that we're having some tension with? How about Venezuela? Anyone know what's going on in Venezuela?
They're having a presidential crisis.
They're having a country crisis. I just read that inflation is up to 10,000%.
And they're out of electricity. And
The electricity isn't working. They don't have any money. How could that be when they have all this oil? They have oil reserves underground in Venezuela that are out of sight. And when they were a prosperous country, they were selling oil to us and making a ton of money and giving people a good life. What changed all of that?
Socialism.
What? What changed all of that?
Socialism. They got a socialist dictator.
And he doesn't like us? He says ugly things about our president. So what does our president do? He says, I'll take the high ground and not do this high school playground stuff. Is that what you read in the media? If he takes a shot at me, if he makes fun of me, I'll make fun of him. I'm thinking, will the adult in the room please stand up and tell everybody it's time to grow up, to minimize these tensions in the world? And by the way, what does our country do when we don't like the way another country's operating? We stop buying their exports. However, it wouldn't matter if you're buying Venezuelan oil or not, because once the dictator drove all the American companies out of the country that were pumping the oil out of the ground to make them rich, they nationalized all of those companies, which meant the government took them over. The government didn't know how to run them, so the machinery all broke down, and now they don't have any oil to sell because they don't know how to pump it out of the ground anymore. The machinery's all broken down. You understand? It's just a tragedy. It's creating tension within Venezuela. It's creating tension between Venezuela and the rest of the world. And because the Venezuelan dictator is a socialist, other socialistic countries don't want socialism to look bad, so they've been propping him up. You know, they've been giving him stuff to help him. And that creates tension between us and those countries. If China's going to help the Venezuela dictator who's doing terrible things to his people, then we're not sure we want to do business with China. Do you understand what would happen if all the stuff that you buy in the store that's made in China is no longer allowed to come to our shore and be sold in the store? If Walmart could only put on the shelf stuff that was made in America, what would happen? You don't know. How many of you look at the labels of your clothing to see where it's made? So where's most of your clothing made? In China. And I think it's been healthy for us to have this good economic relationship with China, because who's going to blow up another country that's making money for you? You follow? Who's going to blow up a country who's doing things? So it seems to me it keeps the guys at the top from hitting the button to blow the other guy off the face of the earth. Because once people in the world start hitting that button, who's going to be left? Nobody. Nobody. I know a lot of people think, no, we have an underground bunker where we can go and live to get away from the explosion. Well, your bunker better be pretty deep. And think about this. After your food in your bunker runs out, you're going to come out to a world that's been nuclearized. Does anyone know what that means? Have all of you read about that nuclear reactor in Ukraine that melted down and just polluted all of this land? It'll be hundreds of years before people can move back in there and live there in a healthy fashion. So even if you have a bunker, you better have some kind of system where you can live underground for a few hundred years, your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids, before they come out of the ground and expose themselves to all of that radiation. I mean, it's just crazy to think about that. And I think the more we diminish the tension and say, let's build good relationships with these other countries around the world so we can alleviate this tension. And you can go to the internet, if you don't know anything about this area, and Google global tensions, and then you can say, oh, I didn't know anything about them, but now I just read about one. On page 7 through 10, it talks about regions. On page 7, the concept of regions. For the purposes of geographic study, we study Earth into regions, which are areas defined by one or more distinctive characteristics. Let me do something here. this on. Go over here and see if we can make something work. Let's go up here and type in, what do I want to type in? Geographic regions. Geographic regions of North America. Whoa! Look at that. North America can divide it into 5 physical regions. Did you know that? The mountainous west, the Great Plains, the Canadian Shield, the Eastern region, and the Caribbean. So which region do you live in? You don't know. The picture's not big enough. Can you tell by looking at that little picture which region you live in? There's the Great Plains. What is this called? The Canadian what? The Canadian Shield? We live in the Canadian Shield? I thought I lived in the Great Plains. You did when you lived in Oklahoma. When you moved to Missouri and this part of the world and Iowa, you've just moved to the Canadian Shield. Well, you learn something every day, don't you? I mean, isn't this cool? Who says, even if you study things, who says you can't learn something in geography? Let's go back. It won't let me go back. Yeah, it is. Oh, okay, let's type it in again. What was it? Geographic? Regions? Geographic regions in the U.S. 4 geographic regions in the United States. What are they? Oh, this is really something. The Northeast, the Midwest, the South, and the West. So where do you live? Well, we're not in the South. What's the Midwest?
We're in the Midwest.
Do you see Missouri in there?
3rd line.
All right. We're in the Midwest. I don't think so. I live in the Central Plains of America. See, growing up in Oklahoma, I studied the Central Plains, the great grasslands. Give me a home where the buffalo roam and the deer and antelope play. And the wheat belt, the breadbasket of the world, raising so much wheat we can feed everyone in America and give wheat away to the rest of the world. By the way, I just mentioned something that you might want to look at. Let's go back up here and type belt regions. Remember I said the wheat belt? Do you know of any other belts? Have you heard of any other belts? I mean, that's what they call them. Belt regions in the United States.
Oh,
The-
the Bible Belt.
The Rust Belt, the Cotton Belt, the Bible Belt. Oh, by the way, the Bible, see, this is regional geography. The Bible Belt, I don't know if you even know this. History is so much fun. The people study America and say, what are these people west of the Mississippi River doing with this allegiance to the Bible? And they call it the Bible Belt. Because we have such an allegiance to the Bible here in the Midwest. Well, years ago, have any of you heard of a guy named Robert Rakes who started having Sunday schools in England? In England, okay, have any of you seen the musical Oliver? You know those old English, those plays of early England where all the kids were a bunch of little ruffians who ran around stealing stuff and causing crime? Well, Robert Rakes was a newspaper man who said somebody ought to do something about it. So he decided to hire some ladies to, on Sunday, when these little kids weren't working in their sweatshops, to hire ladies to teach these kids how to read and to teach them how to read the Bible so he could lead them to Christ and change the culture in England. And did the Church of England think that was a good idea? No, because he was desecrating the Sabbath by running a school on Sunday. Well, his idea caught on in America, and we started doing something in this land called Sunday school, where you go to study the Bible. And a whole bunch of people had a convention and said, let's go to the frontier, which back then was west of the Mississippi River, and let's go to every place where there's a settlement, and let's start a Sunday school. Let's take some books and some curriculum, and let's start a little Sunday school in this village, and once you get one going, then you move on to another one. And they had this 3-year campaign to take the Bible and Sunday school to the frontier. Well, guess what happened? It caught on, and we became the Bible Belt of America as a result of the Sunday school movement. It's such cool stuff. Any idea why Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee are called the Cotton Belt? You say, I don't know. They have a lot of cottonwood trees down there. Any idea? Anybody want to guess why it's called the Cotton Belt?
They produce a lot of cotton.
They raise cotton. Do we raise cotton in Missouri? When I discovered that a few years ago, I go, what? Where do they raise cotton in Missouri? Anyone know where the Boot Heel is? The Boot Heel section of the Boot Heel region of Missouri? Okay, does anyone know what a map of Missouri looks like? What's that little appendage sticking out down at the foot of it? It looks like the heel of a boot. Well, in that region of Missouri, they grow cotton. When I learned that, I said to my wife, I grew up on a farm, and all we raised was wheat and oats and barley and sorghum and stuff, hay. And I said, I'm going to take my girls down to the Boot Heel and let them watch cotton being harvested. It was so cool to see these big machines going across those fields, picking that cotton and taking it back in. And it was just a fun. And but I didn't know when I first moved here that Missouri had a whole region that raised cotton. Well, this is some fun stuff. Look at this, a list of belt regions of the United States. You don't click on that. Why not? Because it says Wikipedia. I go, so Wikipedia is wicked. No, it isn't. My wife said one time, Tom, you can't trust stuff on Wikipedia. I said, and you can trust stuff in Britannica? I don't think so. Not anymore can I trust Wikipedia. I don't know where she got her ideas. Look at this list of belts. The banana belt, the Bible belt, the black belt, the Borscht belt. See, I would have thought that's where people raise beets, but that's referring to a Jewish resorts in the Catskill Mountains. The corn belt, the cotton belt, the frost belt, the fruit belt, the Indiana gas belt, the Jello belt. That's often called the Mormon quarter or the Mormon belt. Western states with a large Mormon population. Man, is this stuff cool? The lead belt, the pine belt, the rice belt. We raise rice in America. Yeah. The Rust Belt, that's where they take all the junk cars. The Salt Belt, the Snow Belt, the Stroke Belt. What? We better look at that. I'm staying away from there. There it is right there. There's the Stroke Belt. Move down there and the probability of a stroke increases substantially. You know, I better tell my wife to send her sister an email. Tell her you need to get out of the stroke belt. The Sun Belt, the unchurched belt. What's that? Whoa. What? Those people up there don't go to church? All the beauty of nature you get to see every day and you don't go to church? I'm thinking if I lived up that way, I'd go to church just because of Mount St. Helens blowing its top once, and if it did it again, it could take us all out. We better get a little serious about this creation stuff. The wheat belt, yeah, that's mine. Where most North American grain and soybeans are raised. By the way, I have to tell you something about this wheat belt stuff because I grew up with it. This wheat belt is so cool. I mean, we raise enough, okay, in the Midwest, all my life, we raised hard red winter wheat. It's the kind of wheat that has, that is the hardiest to live through winter. It's healthy wheat. It produces the right kind of nutrients for people. It's just first class quality wheat. And when it was discovered, if I can use that word, when it was discovered in America, everybody in the Great Plains, everybody in the wheat belt started raising it because it was so valuable, because it was such quality grain. Well, I have an uncle who came from a Mennonite background, and I went to Oklahoma to his funeral, and the preacher said, some of you don't even know this about Mr. Ediger, but one of the reasons we in Oklahoma benefit from hard red winter wheat is because his ancestors who came here from Ukraine years ago brought with them sacks of hard red winter wheat and planted it here and started what we call the wheat belt.
I have to go to the cafeteria.
Not a problem. If you miss something, you can watch it on the video.
Thank you.
And I'm going, what? I didn't know that. So I started doing research on Ukrainians and found out that Ukraine the soil in Ukraine is so productive. I was there one summer teaching in a Bible institute, and a guy, when I arrived, was out planting grass seed. By the end of the week, this grass is like, whoa, you can see it coming up and getting thick. I'm going, what is this? And the guy said, our soil here is very fertile and it's very productive. And so then I read the history of Ukraine. Their soil is so productive that they could raise enough wheat. They were like the breadbasket of Europe. Not only Europe, they raised enough wheat to feed all the people in Russia and Germany. But Russia and Germany kept fighting each other all the time, and often they would use Ukraine as their battlefield. But the Ukrainians said, can you leave us out of the war if we just spend our time feeding the army? And the leader of Russia said, that's a good idea. So they left him alone. Because if you know anything about Mennonites, that was a Mennonite background, they're not very inclined to fight in a war and kill people. And so these Ukrainians said that'll work for us. Then they had a change in leadership in Russia, and the new leader said, no, you Ukrainians have to serve in the army just like everybody else. So a bunch of Ukrainians, the Mennonite Ukrainians, said, we're not staying here. And so they packed up, decided to bring some of their wheat that they raise in Ukraine with them and come to America and find a place where they can live, that they can grow this grain. And sure enough, they found the upper Midwest was the place to live. And they started raising hard red winter wheat, And pretty soon everybody's raising it because it's just so valuable. Isn't that cool to know that people who came to this country because their religious freedoms were being infringed on have contributed to making us the breadbasket of the world? I mean, along with the grain was the fact that we have the mechanical ingenuity to build machines to raise wheat like you couldn't believe. Okay, that's enough of this one. We better keep moving or I'm going to run out of time here. So, questions on the discussion page, questions 7 through 10 says, identify some regions that you're familiar with. Okay, are you familiar with any regions? Didn't I just show you some? You go, oh, I don't remember what they were. Well, then go home and Google it and find them and then just mention some. So that's what they mean by the concept of regions. Now they talk about regions on page 8, and they show a picture of the world. Well, that's the best they can do. Yeah, we've got time for that. You know, why would anybody look at that picture? Well, that's not a good idea. Look at that picture on page 8 and 9, and then look at this. Is this one cool piece of equipment? And I think when you come to class on Wednesday, I'm going to try to have enough of these to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think I have enough to put one on each table. I mean, every time you open your book and see a picture of the globe, I want you to say, no, that's no good. I've got a 3D picture right here in front of me that shows these regions of the world. And just looking at this, I mean, it shows all the regions that it shows in the book there. I'm turning it the wrong way, aren't I? Because I ought to be going like this, because the way the sun comes up. Just looking at this thing while it's spinning, and it tilts like that. That's pretty crazy that it tilts like that. How come it's tilted? I don't know. Must have been a cosmic explosion that threw it off balance. No. You know what the creator of the universe did? He said, if it's like this, the seasons will never change. If we tilt it 23 degrees, as it goes around, as it rotates around the sun will hit it at a different angle. See, when it's down there, it hits it down below. That's our winter, and that's their summer. And then when the sun's shining, think of the clock back there as being the sun. Then when it's on this other side of the sun, then the sun's shining on us. That's our summer, and that's their winter down there. Is that cool? It wasn't a cosmic explosion that put us at 23 degrees. It was the creative act of our Heavenly Father who put this thing together, so we have these beautiful 4 seasons we get to enjoy. Have any of you ever lived someplace where you didn't have the benefit of these 4 seasons? Doesn't it get a little boring?
Yeah.
I mean, it just does. So what do? There, we'll tilt it just there so it looks more realistic.
It's nice not to have 4 different sets of clothing though.
Yes, you only have to have one thing to wear because it works all year round. So whenever you see one of these pictures, and if you want to, you can go on the internet and find these and buy one of these just to have at home, because, I mean, it's just pretty. Wouldn't that be cool to have that sitting on your dresser at home somewhere? On page 10, it talks about some regions in North America, the West, the Midwest. It's fun if you want to go on the internet and Google languages or people's accents, how they say words. and you can identify those regions as well. On page 11 through 15, on page 11 it talks about spatial analysis. Spatial analysis. Let's go back here. Whoops. Let's go back here and type in, what are we going to type in? Spatial patterns. I better say geographic. Geographic, spatial. Is that the way they spelled it? Geographic, spatial patterns. Okay. Well, look at that. It popped up there. Spatial patterns in geography. It refers to the organization and placement of people and objects in the human world. And which ones do I like here? Images of geographic spatial patterns. Let's look at those. I always like pictures. What is that? Anyone know what that red line is?
The Mississippi River.
What?
Mississippi River.
The Mississippi River. Has anyone ever been down here to see how much water is running out of the Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico? It's huge. When you sit there and watch all that water running out into the Gulf of Mexico, what's the obvious question? Where is all of this water coming from? Am I the only one that asks questions like that? No wonder I like geography. I'm so curious. I ask these questions. I'm with a bunch of people and I'm going, where does all this water come from? And they go, who cares? I'm going, I do. They go, well, let's go to the amusement park. You know what I'm thinking amusement parks stand for? Turn off your brain. Come on. Let's just take an interest in the world around us. Okay, enough of my shots at amusement parks. Here's the Mississippi River. It's huge down here. It's rather small up here. But look what happens. Here's water coming from Illinois. And from way out here, then you get down here, here's more water coming from these 1, 2, 3, 4 states. Here's water coming from here. Say, why does it go down there and come back? Because of the mountains in Tennessee. And then here's some more water coming out here from Colorado, through Nebraska, through Oklahoma and Arkansas. Anyone know what this river is called?
Well, in Arkansas, isn't it the Arkansas River?
The Arkansas River. That's not what the people who live here call it. What do they call it? The Arkansas River. I'm thinking these people are saying it ought to be called the Colorado River. No, we already got one of those going the other way through the Grand Canyon. This ought to be called the Little Colorado. It might be up there, but when it got to Kansas, they called it the Kansas River. When it got to Oklahoma, it wasn't there long. They didn't know what to call it. Got to Arkansas, they said it's the Arkansas River. So now it's like, no, it's not the Kansas, it's the Arkansas because it meets the Mississippi here in Arkansas. Oh, okay, so now everybody calls it the Arkansas River. No, the Arkansas River.
That's right.
I lived too close to Kansas when I was growing up.
Donald.
So that's what they mean by analyzing space, looking at a space and going, wow, what's going on here? What's happening here? Let's go back and see if we can find another one on here. Yeah, here's one. What's this one all about? U.S. cities larger than 15,000 people. Can you see this picture of Missouri? There's the boot heel. What I'm wondering is, how come Arkansas gave them that little patch of land? That would be something to study, wouldn't it? Just to
No.
what?
No.
Maybe Arkansas didn't give it to them; they took it.
No. It's not true.
Yeah, very true. It's pretty true.
It'd be interesting to know the history of that.
Baby.
But see, look at Missouri, okay? Here's one side of Missouri, here's the other side, where it's talking about cities larger than 15,000 people. See, this is called, what is this called we're doing here? I have so much fun doing it, I forget what the technical word is. It's called spatial patterns in geography. It's looking at spatial patterns. So, why does Missouri have a big clump here and a big clump here?
Kansas City and St. Louis.
Kansas City and St. Louis. So why with all of Missouri here, why would Kansas City and St. Louis be two places that have great big globs of cities with 15,000 people or more? What do Kansas City and St. Louis have in common? Nothing if you ask people in St. Louis. They cheated us out of a World Series. Get over it, people. You lost. Kansas City won that World Series. No, it was a bad call at first. If one bad call at first caused you to lose the series, you lost the series, people. So what do Kansas City and St. Louis have in common? See, I grew up in Oklahoma. What's this all about? Big clump here and a big clump here. Oh, that's Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Why? Oklahoma City is the capital of the state, and Tulsa is the capital of country music in Oklahoma. And between their political state capital and country music, that pretty well covers Oklahoma. I mean, if you grew up in Oklahoma, when I grew up in Oklahoma, I didn't know there was any other kind of music other than cowboy music, because that's what all the radio stations played. Moved to Kansas City, and I heard a whole bunch of different kinds of music that came from all over the place. What's the connection between these two? You don't know. You don't care. The river. Because there's no river in Oklahoma, well, there is. That Arkansas River that goes to up here, that is so funny. You can drive over it and not even realize you drove over a river. It's so small in Oklahoma. But it's just like we didn't have rivers. I come here to Kansas City, go down there and go, whoa, look at this huge, big river. And then when I lived in Illinois, we were right on the Mississippi. Wow, that is amazing to see how huge this thing is and how much water just keeps floating down to the Gulf of Mexico. But the thing they have in common is the river. Because in early America, how did you get, what's the quickest way to get from St. Louis to Kansas City?
The river.
On a boat, on a river. And then from Kansas City up here, what's this right here? That town right there, that must be St. Joe. Bigger than 15,000. So what's the big deal about St. Joe? Anyone know what left St. Joe and went all the way to California to take the mail so people in California could know what was going on in the rest of the world? Some guy invented the Pony Express. He bought a bunch of horses, built a bunch of stations along the way, set up a business, making money hand over fist, then all of a sudden, he's out of business. I mean, within less than 5 years, he's out of business. What happened? Oh, why run horses all the way from St. Joe to California when you can take poles? The telegraph had been invented, string wire on it, and go tap, 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 and the guy in California is tapping right back to you. I mean, it's just, to me, analyzing space as to why things happen like they do. What's all this stuff around here? What are those, that clump of cities doing? Any idea?
Chicago.
What's going on in the Chicago area? Do any of you know what they built? Didn't they used to have a bunch of people building cars up there? You don't know. Well, spatial analysis just talks about distribution and concentration. I mean, that shows 15,000 people. Let's turn back here and look at this one. That one just looks dirty. Persons per square mile. Now look at this. See this light brown stuff here? There's one person per square mile out here. Can you imagine one person on every square mile? Do you even know what a square mile looks like? Do any of you ever drive down County Line Road? You leave campus, just keep driving on 155th Street to see where it goes? Okay, do you get far enough out there and you start to pass some fields where there's a road? If you see a road and you look at your odometer and then you watch for the next road, it'll be 0.10 of a mile. It'll be 1 mile. Think about going that distance a mile, and then that distance a mile that way, and back a mile, and back a mile, and say there's one person that lives on that square mile. These folks out here, you want to go see your neighbor? You better plan to make a trip for a few hours down the road. I mean, people out here say, let's get in the car and go to Walmart. What does that mean? It's going to be a 4-hour drive there and a 4-hour drive back. It's going to be a whole day's excursion just going shopping at Walmart because the nearest one's 4 hours away. Say, well, why don't they build one out here in the middle? Can you see the Walmart company building a Walmart out in the middle of this?
Nope.
Not enough people to support the thing. They probably couldn't even hire enough people to run the place.
Arkansas.
Well, what do people who live out there do? Any idea what those people do for a living?
Farmers.
You don't know. Well, Google it. Say, what do people who live out there in that area of the world do for a living? Does it surprise you that most of them are farmers and ranchers? Oh, hey, wave at me. When it's time to leave, it's 10 minutes till. Don't you go to chapel now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let me know. Just say, hey, time's up. Let me out of here. You're gone. We'll pick up with this on Wednesday. Okay, for those who don't have a book, I'm going to take a book over and give it to the library right now.